is that these regimes will respond to the demands of the protesters in a way that allows for sort of an evolution towards democracy. And they're
you think
worried,
that's possible with Muammar Gaddafi? You think they think that that's possible with?
Well, I don't think they necessarily think it's possible with Gaddafi. No, I mean, in Libya, what you have is a regime that's much harsher, much tougher when it comes to human rights than, say, the Egyptian regime was. I think, again, they're hoping that you won't see simply a wave of chaos across the Middle East, that what you'll see is evolution towards democracy. I think the reaction to what's happening in Libya will change as time goes on. In fact, I imagine it'll be different tomorrow morning than it is tonight as they watch these developments.
When Saif Gaddafi then gave his address, we were wondering whether a portion of it clearly was, much of it was aimed at the Libyan people, but some of it was also aimed at policymakers in Washington as he raised the spectre of emirates being formed in parts of Libya, Islamic separatism, of separatism in general, actually, and so forth. What sort of reaction do you think those statements, how do you think they would have been received here in Washington? How much does America really know about Libya, actually, frankly?
Well, I think that we know more about Libya than we do about a place like Iran, where we haven't had a diplomatic presence. We do now have an embassy in Tripoli, for example. I think that, though, Saif al-Islam's speech will not be received well in Washington. The tone itself was quite harsh, and the warnings that he was issuing will not be well received, because what the United States is looking for is a positive response to the demands of the protesters. At the same time, I think that what we're not seeing in many of these responses, in a sense, you see the responses quite similar from country to country from the regimes. Instead of responding to what we consider legitimate demands from the protesters, they're presenting what we consider a false choice between fundamentalism and authoritarianism.
Well, actually, there was a lot of Washington people who were presenting that as a choice in Egypt not so long ago. It does seem to have fertile ground when these sort of concepts are thrown out to Washington policymakers, certainly.
There's some who accept it, but I think the administration's been quite clear. I think the previous administration was quite clear that we do regard this as a false choice. That, in fact, it's not simply fundamentalism versus authoritarianism, but that democracy is possible in the Arab world just as it's possible in Europe or Asia or North America. And so that, I think, is the appropriate response to this kind of false choice that's being presented by Saif al-Islam.
Michael Singh, for the moment, thank you very much. We've now managed to receive a call from Hisham. He's a resident in Tripoli. He's witnessed the protests in Green Square in central Tripoli. For security reasons, we're just using his first name. Hisham, thank you very much for joining us. What are you witnessing at the moment?
I just left the Green Square. I'm left right now. There's protests in support of the government, with Gaddafi. There's people, going around the square in cars with guns and with his picture.
So supporters of the government?
I beg your pardon?
Supporters of Muammar Gaddafi?
Yes. There's a lot of blockades on the roads. There's a lot of dustbins set on fire, a lot of bricks and broken glass left over from fights. There's a lot of pictures of Gaddafi on the floor, left over from fights. But right now, there's supporters in the square.
And where are the opponents of Gaddafi?
In the square, there's nobody.
So they left?
There's anti-demonstration police blocking it up, making sure there isn't any more violence, and there's just supporters.
We spoke to a protester just about an hour ago who said that they were returning to Green Square. We spoke to a protester about an hour and a half ago who said that after the speech, the opponents of Muammar Gaddafi returned to the square and will not surrender it now that they're allowed, and they could not see the military anywhere. But you're saying that situation has changed?
There's no military. The roads are empty, and all the roads in Tripoli are empty. There's no police, there's no military, there's nobody. But in this Green Square, the Green Square isn't as big as you would imagine it. It's quite small. In the Green Square, there's like anti-demonstration police who usually aren't armed. They've just got batons and stuff like that. And there's government supporters. And there aren't any fights or anything like that.
Did the opponents of Mr. Gaddafi leave off their own account, or were they forcibly removed then?
I wasn't there when it ended. I just got there like for half an hour ago.
Right. Well, that's an interesting development, which we'll have to follow up now. Did you see the speech of Saif Gaddafi?
Yeah.
What did you think of it?
I think it's terrifying people. It's just, to try to limit the options, as if there's no option but the current option, or what the previous option, and there's no better alternative. In short,
he promised.
He's trying to frighten the Libyans as if there's going to be a civil war, and he's trying to frighten the West from Libya as if there's going to be a global state.
He promised a national assembly to look into reform and democracy. Why not accept him at his offer?
I beg your pardon?
Why not accept his offer to take part in a...
I'm not in a position to accept or refuse. I'm only a normal citizen.
But would you agree?
But this promise has been, presented multiple times, and his role, as everybody knows, has diminished in the last few months. The only reason he's speaking out is because of what's happened. But in the past months, his role diminished. He couldn't, fulfill his promises, his past promises.
As far as you know, will the opposition attempt to return, to go back to Green Square tomorrow?
Yeah, I think so. Tomorrow morning.
Hisham, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
You're watching Al Jazeera. The top story: the son of Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi has warned that ongoing protests in the country could spark a civil war that would deplete Libya of its oil wealth. In a televised address to the nation, Saif al-Islam also said the General Popular Congress would meet on Monday to discuss reform. That followed reports of clashes between pro and anti-government protesters in the capital, Tripoli, though as we've just heard, it would appear, at least from one eyewitness, that central square that's been a focal point for protests, Green Square, has been emptied of opponents of Colonel Gaddafi and is now filled with supporters. Although we have heard from various opponents of Muammar Gaddafi that they do intend once again to rally in Green Square in the coming days. These are pictures, however, though, from Benghazi, where Libyan security forces we understand, well, actually, we've had different reports. Certainly, most recently, we heard reports that the military units in Benghazi were no longer firing on opponents of Muammar Gaddafi, and indeed, in Saif Gaddafi's speech, he suggested that the reports we heard of tanks and other military weaponry being in the hands of opponents may be true. He said opponents were actually driving in tanks. But certainly from the witnesses we've spoken in Benghazi, there seems to be some sort of cooperation, a level of cooperation between the military and opponents at the hospital and elsewhere. The protests elsewhere in the region, anti-government demonstrators in Bahrain are preparing for the long haul. They've set up camp in the capital, Manama. Hundreds are spending the night at the Pearl Roundabout after the government ordered the military to withdraw from the area. James Bays reports from the capital.